Krishna, everybody. Hare Krishna, everybody. I've been requested to give you a summary of the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, and the title of that chapter is the universal form. And I think you probably have been studying that chapter, is it not? That you've been studying this chapter.
Yes, we finished the entire 11th chapter. But before Mati starts, I'll quickly introduce our very wonderful Mother Laxmimoni. So she came to Krishna consciousness almost 5 decades ago. And
more than 5 decades ago I came. I haven't entered yet, but I came in 1969. I took initiation in 1969.
I think it was way before any of us was born. And in her first 6 months, she started 3 temples. She has been active in Canada and US. She's been a teacher for 28 years, especially training women, girls into Krishna consciousness, as well as Vedic knowledge and academics. And I met her through her teacher training program, where she teaches people like myself who are having little programs of how to help others understand the knowledge, how to basically share this knowledge in such a way that people can understand it and retain it. So and it was a mind-blowing exercise for all of us. And since then, all of us have been her I can't say fans, but definitely aspiring students of hers. And so we are very grateful that Mother Laxmimoni is here. She's an ocean of knowledge and experience and realizations. So 11th chapter is about Krishna's divine aspect. So Bhagavad Gita has 5 aspects, right? It's about God, time, material nature, jiva, ourselves, and karma. So this is more about Krishna and his universal form. So sometimes it can be a little hard to understand. So Mother Laxmimoni will make us accessible. So if you have questions, do ask her at the end, and we'll let Mother Laxmimoni take over from here. Haribol.
I hope I get to the end. Actually, it's funny, but we read certain parts of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, this chapter in particular, and it doesn't have as much appeal as parts of the Bhagavad Gita which describe the relationship between the living entity or things that we can relate to, like the 3 modes of material nature. And somehow the universal form seems very distant. But the universal form, like the creation stories in the Bhagavatam, have a very important purpose. And that important purpose is to show us the greatness of God. In Vaishnava theology, we tend to focus more on the living entity's relationship with God and with Krishna in particular. And his godness is actually secondary to that relationship. We read the stories of the great devotees, including Arjuna, and we see even in these prayers that Arjuna will give to Krishna at the end of this chapter, and also elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, and certainly in the Srimad Bhagavatam, many great devotees pray to Krishna, but they don't pray to him so much about his godness. They pray to him more because they love him, and they want his mercy, they want service to him, they want to see him smile, they want to experience his sweetness. And here, Arjuna, at the beginning of this chapter, the chapter begins with Arjuna asking Krishna to show a different aspect of himself, an aspect of himself which he's described in other places in the Bhagavad Gita, his opulences, his Aishwarya, his power, but always, as usual, the more you were talking about teacher training, well, in teacher training, we learn that the more senses that are stimulated in the learning process, the deeper the learning process becomes. So if we have our ears and our eyes and our senses, if we're acting, then we remember things better than if we just hear them. And so often our learning experience, especially on Zoom, is separated a lot from direct sensory experiences. We try to fake them in some way or create them in some way in the Zoom experience or the virtual experience, but it's virtual. It's not real, it's not direct. So here Arjuna is approaching Krishna and saying, I don't think that's really sufficient. I would like to see your vibhutis. I would like to see your greatness. I would like to see how you pervade the entire material world, because you've talked to me about it, and others may read about it, but I want to see that. I want to experience it. And I want to experience not only for me, but I want to experience it because I know that people will be skeptical and it'll be hard for them to understand you in all your variegated aspects, all the different wonderful and amazing aspects of yourself. It will be very difficult for them to relate to that. And furthermore, there are so many people that come forward and express that they are God, or that, they have some mystic powers, they have some yogic siddhis, and they get accepted by the ignorant as being manifestations of the Supreme Lord. So I want a litmus test. I want to show that God has powers that no one else has. And so if you show your universal form, then all persons who proclaim to be God in the future can be held to do that as well, to show that their universal form, and that can be a test which will eliminate pretenders. So in the first four verses rather, in this chapter, we hear Arjuna's request to Krishna. And he is basing it, of course, on his experience from the last chapters, where Krishna was expressing the divine nature of himself, and ultimately how the most confidential knowledge of himself. And now Arjuna wants to see that. He wants it right in front of his face. So then Krishna agrees to that. And we'll understand later on that Krishna agrees, and he agrees to it for a reason. He agrees to it because Arjuna is his dear devotee. And because Arjuna is such an Ananya Bhakta, Krishna offers him that opportunity to see this most unique form. A few things about the universal form, just in general, is Krishna shows the universal form, or a universal form, in many different places. He shows the universal form to Mother Jasoda when she looks in his mouth and sees herself looking in his mouth, and sees all the universes again. And he also shows this form when Krishna comes to the assembly of the Kauravas, and they threaten to arrest him. So then he shows a universal form that's sufficient to show them that they are not able to arrest him, that he's beyond their capacity, discipline. So he shows it there. And it's described elsewhere that he shows universal forms here and there. But this particular universal form that Krishna is going to show Arjuna has particular purposes. One is to satisfy Arjuna's curiosity, to satisfy what he considers a need to be of others, to see the universal form in the future, but also to show Arjuna the future, to give Arjuna a temporary manifestation of the ability to know whether the battle is going to be, what the outcome of the battle is going to be. Because Arjuna, throughout the Bhagavad Gita, he's expressed concerns about fighting rather, and about what the outcome will be, who will die. He's so worried that his brothers will die, his relatives he knows will die. Somebody has to die, and all of them are his relatives. So he wants to know more about this. And so Arjuna is going to hear that I'll show you everything you wish to see, and then some. And I'll show you my vibhutis. I'll give it to you in three-dimensional color so that you can really experience it firsthand. So maybe some of you have had the experience. If you go to Mayapur, you can have the experience where you can see a three-dimensional video presentation. And when you see it on a flat screen, it's different than when you see it in a three-dimensional presentation. It becomes much more real. I remember going to an IMAX theater in America, and there was one part of it when there were rodents running, and you could feel them under your feet, and you can hear the sounds coming as if they were running all over the theater. In fact, they were only on a screen, but they felt like they were present all around us. And it was very scary. People were screaming, and you can imagine some of the ladies in the audience were extremely uncomfortable with mice running around at their feet. And but there were no mice. It was all a three-dimensional presentation. So here, Krishna in reality is going to be on a chariot, a very small space in comparison. And he's going to display this form for Arjun's particular viewing. He's going to give some other people the ability to view it also. We'll find out later that he gives the demigods, some of the demigods, the ability to see it. And he gives Sanjaya the ability to see it. But other than those people, no one has ever seen it before. And the people on the battlefield are not seeing this vision. So in these first 5 verses, we have Arjuna's request. And then in the next few verses, 3 verses, we see Krishna's description of what he's about to show. And one thing Krishna says that's interesting is you can't see what you're asking to see with the eyes that you have. I will have to give you divine eyes. And our acharyas explain, Srila Prabhupada also explains that this divinity that is awarded to Arjuna in his vision is an ability to see Krishna's universal form is actually a step down, which is an important lesson for all of us to learn, that Krishna's highest form, and we're going to see this throughout this display and hear it at the end of this chapter, that Krishna's highest form is his human-like form. His highest relationships are his relationships with his devotees in love and devotion. And this is a pillar of the Vaishnava tradition that we aspire not just to understand that God's in control and that he can send us to hell at a moment, or send us to heaven at a moment, or give us money when we're poor, or make us well when we're sick. Those are things that people go to God for when they still have a material concern and a material vision, and they're approaching God as if he were in charge of the material world, which he certainly is. But there's something much more important than that. We see with the story of Dhruva Maharaj in the Bhagavatam, that Dhruva Maharaj also approached God on the suggestion of his mother because he wanted a kingdom greater than his grandfather, which happened to be Lord Brahma. So he did severe austerities on the advice of Narada, and Krishna appeared to him. But when he saw that personal form of Krishna, he said, I was looking for broken pieces of glass, but now I found a priceless gem. So even he was just a young boy, he had a profound realization that the sight, just the mere sight or the loving exchange of a devotee with the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the most valuable experience. And whatever Krishna does with his greatness, especially in the material world, is a secondary concern. Devotees don't approach Krishna and ask him for things or hope that he will give them things or protect them from things, although that happens. But rather they long for that loving relationship with Krishna. But in order to serve his devotee, Krishna offers Arjuna divine eyes, demigod eyes that will allow him to see this form in the material world. This form, this universal form, is a material form. It does not exist in the spiritual world. It's a manifestation of Krishna's material power, and it is being shown to Arjuna to show Arjuna that his material power is even greater than Arjuna thought it was, than he could understand from Krishna's previous descriptions. Then we move on in text 9 through 14, and we hear a little bit of another person's vision of the universal form. Now, Arjuna is a friend of Krishna. He has a very intimate friendly relationship with Krishna. And we hear about that in prayers. Arjuna will speak about it later, that you and I sat on the same bed. We joked together. We ate together. You even, devised a plan for me to marry your sister. And I came in disguise as a sannyasi, and then I ran off with her. I kidnapped her. And so these things that you have and you and I have done, perhaps they were wrong. Perhaps I was too familiar with you. But as with Mother Jasoda in a different rasa, Krishna didn't really want that to happen. And you'll see that as Arjuna expresses that feeling, Krishna will in turn leave that universal form and take the form which Arjuna loves him in, which is his two-armed form. So Arjuna is looking at this whole experience through the eyes of a certain kind of devotee, not just an Ananya Bhakta, but an Ananya Bhakta in the relationship of friendship. Now we have another person who's looking, and that's Sanjaya. And Sanjaya was Dhritarashtra's chariot driver. He also had a loving relationship with Krishna. He was very affectionate and very aware that Krishna was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unlike his master. But he was also in a position of servitorship, both to Dhritarashtra and to Krishna. And so his familiarity with Krishna was overshadowed by feelings of respect and feelings of veneration. And we hear that in in Sanjaya's discussion with Dhritarashtra throughout Bhagavad Gita from the beginning to the end, and also in these 4 verses or 5 verses where he describes what he sees, but he's describing what he sees to a foreigner. It's just like when you meet someone on the street and you want to tell them about Krishna, or you meet someone in your office and you want to tell him about Krishna, but he doesn't know anything about Krishna. You have to be careful what you tell him. You have to build your relationship with them and their relationship with Krishna in such a way that their faith doesn't become damaged, that they become able to hear whatever they're able to hear. And an expert preacher is someone who's able to do that. And Sanjaya had to play that part with Dhritarashtra because Dhritarashtra was not exactly a devotee. And he was very much overwhelmed by material desire. And his material desire had clouded his vision in the past and continues to cloud it through the battle of Kurukshetra all the way up until he quits home by the merciful intervention of his brother Vidura. So Sanjaya says, you don't understand what I'm seeing, how big it is. It's all pervading, it's everywhere, and it has many forms within it, and it's shockingly powerful, and it's fulgent, greater than 1,000 suns rising in the same place. And so he tries to give Dhritarashtra, who's blind materially. That's another thing, is that when someone is congenitally blind from birth, and they've never seen with their eyes, ever, they have no frame of reference to see something, even to say it's brighter than 1,000 suns. If you've never seen one sun, how do you compare that to 1,000 suns? When you don't know what a sun is, you've never seen a sun, but you might know a sun is warm because you can feel it, or if you're comparing it to a flower, you might know because you've smelled a flower, or you've touched a flower, but you've never seen a flower. So, and Sanjaya is trying to find the words to give Dhritarashtra the vision within his mind of something that he's never seen with his eyes. So even the analogies that Vidura is trying to give him, the picture that Vidura is trying to paint him, is inaccurate. It's insufficient, but it's all Dhritarashtra is capable of. And he's capable of very little, actually, because of his material desire and his enviousness. He hasn't been able to see Krishna, even though he's been standing right next to Krishna. And when Krishna came to the battle, to the assembly of the Kauravas and offered him vision to see, he refused to accept it. He didn't want to see. He preferred to remain blind. His blindness was an excuse because he was blind not only materially, but he was also blind spiritually. And he didn't want to not be blind. That's really important. He didn't want to not be blind. His blindness was a comfort for him. His attachment to his sons, his attachment to power, they were more important to him than clear vision. So Sanjaya is making an effort, but that effort is almost futile. And at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see, even at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, in the first chapter, you'll see that Arjuna is upset and Krishna is smiling. And why is he smiling? He's smiling because he knows that this is an arrangement. So Bhagavad Gita will be spoken. He's upset because he's not seeing clearly. And he thinks, I have to convince Arjuna to fight. I'm going to convince him to surrender. And I'm going to help everybody else who reads this book to be convinced to surrender. But Dhritarashtra, he doesn't get it. And he becomes angry. He becomes angry at Krishna for intervening. He thinks if Krishna would have minded his own business, then Arjuna would have quit the battle and my sons would have been king and we would have kept Indraprastha and Hastinapur. The Pandavas would have gone back into the forest for another 14 years and we all would have lived happily ever after. And it's all Krishna's fault. So even from the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, right up until the end, Dhritarashtra just doesn't get it. He just doesn't understand who Krishna is and who Arjuna is either. So then enough said of everybody's vision of the universal form. The vision of the universal form begins. And it begins now. Arjuna has these divine eyes. He's heard what it's going to look like because Krishna has given him some description of what he's about to see. And then all of a sudden it starts. The curtain opens and he sees. Kunti also describes Maya Javani Kachchanam. You're covered by a curtain. And when you lift that curtain, then the vision of a devotee as empowered by the Supreme Lord becomes quite amazing. And so Arjuna sees the universal form in various stages. So for the first few verses, he's just seeing something amazing, something big. The whole battlefield basically disappears. And Arjuna is looking at this surround vision that he has of an entity with multiple heads and multiple weapons and multiple things happening. Each of those living entities that he sees, each of the demigods, each of the forms that he sees, they're autonomous. They're connected to each other, but their ability to function is autonomous. So they may be doing different things. They're not just like, sometimes you see a universal form as a diorama and everybody's kind of frozen in time. But this isn't like that. This is a dynamic form. There's things going on here. And Arjuna describes it as difficult to look at because it's so shiny and so bright and so overwhelming that he's having a hard time grabbing it to see what's going on. There's so many things going on that he doesn't know what to look at first, and he's not exactly sure what he's seeing because of the bright effulgence. As the vision goes on in text 19, the vision starts to become a bit more scary. And Arjuna sees that what's happened is that battlefield which had disappeared from his vision because of the all-pervasive nature of the universal form that he was looking at, which is on his chariot. Now, when he's looking at that form, the members of the battle are actually in that form. So if you can imagine, like you're at a horror movie or something, and there's this big monster, and he's, grabbing people in his hands and squishing them, or Kumbhakarna is coming and he's stepping on people or monkeys as he's walking down the back. And then all of a sudden you see this form right next to you in the theater, right? And you're the next person that's going to be stepped on, perhaps. It's very frightening. He looks at Krishna's eyes and he sees the sun and the moon and fire coming out of his mouths. He's got many mouths, and every one of those mouths is spitting fire. But there's one main form that Arjuna is seeing, and he's seeing these teeth, these big teeth opening up. And what's more is he's seeing the members of the battle, not only the enemies, but his friends too. He's seeing Drona and he's seeing Bhishma, and he's seeing them entering this big mouth. And some of them he's seeing crushed on the teeth. And some of them he's seeing coming like rivers into an ocean. And some of them he's seeing like moths flying into a flame. And this is all very, very important because, well, first of all, Arjuna, when he sees this form, he's inspired, or out of fear, he goes through many, many different emotional states. And in this particular place, at the beginning, he starts, excuse me, he starts being astonished, but his astonishment quickly turns into fear and anxiety, a lot of anxiety. And then he's ghastliness because he sees these, can you imagine people getting crushed on the teeth of a big form, a big monster, Jurassic Park, if you're familiar with that movie, where the dinosaurs are eating each other and people and traveling around, squishing trees and things. So Krishna has taken an extraordinary form, and he's seeing all these members of the battlefield that are on the battlefield. They're being killed. Previews of the coming attractions. This is what's going to happen. And so he asks Krishna, who are you and what is your mission? Why is this going on? But besides asking him that question, Arjuna is trembling. He's sweating. He's terrorized by this vision. And so, first of all, taking a little bit of a look at these two analogies for the different persons who are having slightly different experiences being killed by this universal form. They're both being killed in the material sense of the word, but they're being killed in different ways. So the ones who are dear to Arjuna, Bhishma mainly is given as the example, but it isn't only Bhishma. They're being swept along by inevitable time. Everybody in the material world, including devotees, is being swept along by inevitable time and their karmas to some extent. So you see all the great acharyas, we celebrate their appearance day and we celebrate their disappearance day. And for them, their disappearance day and appearance day are basically the same thing, because when they're alive, they're engaged in service to Krishna. And when they are no longer in a material body, they're also engaged in service to Krishna. When they're in the material world, they're absorbed in being with Krishna and thinking about him and chanting his names and reading him and singing his glories. And when they're out of the material world, they're back in Goloka Vrindavan. And what are they doing? They're chanting his glories. They're reading about him. They're speaking about him. They're serving him. So this is compared to the rivers flowing into the ocean. It's a natural process. It happens to every water on the planet, that every water has a source, and in the end, it flows back towards that source. So it's not an artificial process. It's not a process that's born of any particular thing that I did. I didn't have to be mean or enviousness or envy or anything to get that. That just happens. It's the normal course of events. So, and Krishna tried to explain that to Arjuna at the beginning, that don't be worried about Bhishma and Drona. They have old bodies now. Their bodies are going to die. And that's normal. If they get new bodies, they'll get new bodies, and then they'll have better situation, because the situation now is deteriorated. I can speak from my own experience. In the mid 70s, that's what I am now, in my mid 70s. And now, kind of everything starts to deteriorate. Your eyes don't work so well, your ears don't work so well, your voice doesn't work so well. Your body doesn't work so well, everything hurts a little bit. And I've heard from authorities who've gone past the place where I am, that these wonderful things to look forward to happen more and more. So something to look forward to. And it's just the nature of the material world. Everything, when it hits time, when time hits it deteriorates. That wonderful new car that you have, you take a look at it even in a few years, and it'll have scratches and dents and rust and so many things. Parts won't work, new parts won't be available because it'll deteriorate. The phones you have, probably in a few months, there'll be an upgrade, and the ones you have will no longer be the latest technology, and they'll invent something that makes what you do have obsolete. The nature of the material world is like that. But the others, the ones who fly like moths into a flame, the moths fly into a flame because they're attracted. They're attracted to the glow, the glitter of the flame. But that flame, that very same thing that they're attracted to, causes their death. And it's almost like that draw to the flame is something they can't get out of. They're so addicted to that attachment that even though they may have some idea, Dhritarashtra was told gazillions of times that his attraction to his son and his attraction to wealth and the kingdom was going to be the cause of his destruction and the destruction of his sons. Duryodhana was hell-bent on getting the kingdom at any cost. He was willing to cheat. He was willing to lie. He was willing to be irreverent. I was hearing one story about Maitreya Muni came in contact with Duryodhana. Out of his compassion, he came to him to give him some advice. He said, "Listen to me. I have nothing to win or lose by telling you this, but you shouldn't fight this war. You should just resplit the kingdom, give them Indraprastha, you take Hastinapur, and be happy with what you have, because you're going to lose this war. And you're not only going to lose this war, but you're going to lose everything. And you're going to lose your fame, you're going to lose your strength, you're going to lose your fortune, you're going to lose everything. You're going to lose your brothers. And I'm telling you this because I want to help you." And Duryodhana was so arrogant. There's one thing to ignore somebody. Your mother, she might tell you so many things. You go, "Yeah, my thanks a lot." And then you go do what you want. But you're not irreverent to her. You don't know, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just an old lady. If you speak like that, then it's offensive and there'll be ramifications for that. But Duryodhana was so proud that even to a great sage, and even to the Pandavas, and even to Draupadi, he was totally disrespectful. In his arrogance, he thought that he could not be hurt or defeated in any way. And because he was so arrogant and because he was so irreverent, he created havoc for himself. He created we'll see in a little while also, he created a whole path of destruction, not only for himself, but for everybody who was on his side. Everyone was on his side, died like a moth going to a flame, with an inglorious death and a liturgy or a trail of tears behind them. Of course, they were killed by Krishna, so they got some liberation, or they were killed seeing Krishna. They got some degree of liberation, but still their departure was not glorious. And with Duryodhana, certainly that was not the case, at least in the Mahabharata. If you go to the Puranas, you can probably find that he was so-and-so and did something. But the lessons that we have to learn in the Mahabharata teach us that he was a foolish person. And so he offended Maitreya by saying, you don't understand. He slapped his thigh and he said, like a wrestler slaps his arms and slaps his thighs. So Duryodhana did that. And he said, I'm so strong, my arms, my legs, no one can defeat me. And the Muni was offended. He said, how dare you approach me like that? I came here out of my way to give you some good advice. Of course, many people had done that. And Dhritarashtra Duryodhana basically replied to all of them in the same way. He told Vidura, just get out of here. Who do you think you are? He should be thrown out of the kingdom with nothing but his, the four directions or whatever. So he was by nature like that. And so he got cursed. He got cursed by Maitreya Rishi that that thigh that you slapped in front of me in such a disrespectful way, that will be the cause of your death. Bhima said said that he would kill you by hitting that thigh because you were disrespectful to Draupadi. Well, that will come true. He will kill you by that thigh. That thigh will be the cause of your death. And then some of the elders came and begged for mercy. And he said, the only way that this can be avoided is if he doesn't participate in the war. If he participates in the war, there's no way of avoiding this thing. So like a moth, helplessly drawn to the fire, even though that fire is going to kill him. So Duryodhana and all the members of his team, so to speak, were drawn to this inevitable destruction. And Krishna had a goal of getting them all off the planet too. So he says, time I am, and I've come to destroy all the worlds. I've done this battle of Kurukshetra was part of my plan. And so you're seeing, Arjuna, all these warriors dying, but that's what I do. By the agency of Kala, of time, Krishna destroys everything in the material world. There's nothing that gets past him. And so this section of the Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna sees this Kala Rupa is extremely important and powerful in our lives too, because it's not the nicest thing we want to see about Krishna, but it's the thing we tend to see. And Prabhupada says, if we refuse to see Krishna in any other way, if we don't see God in any other way, then we'll see him as death, because there's no way of avoiding that. So now the Krishna instructs Arjuna after this part of the universal form. He says, now you understand what I've tried to teach you. Now you understand that these people are going to be killed. You have nothing to do with it. I want you to just nimitta matram bhava sajasachan. I want you to just become my instrument. You're just it's just like a club. If I hit somebody with a gutta, or I stab some with a knife, that knife will kill them, or the gutta will kill them, but it's not the knife's fault. It's not the gutta's fault. It's the wielder that is responsible. So I'm the wielder, Krishna says. I'm the person who arranged this. I'm the one who's putting this into practice. You just have to become an instrument and everything will work out right, all right. So please just do your service, and death would happen to them one way or the other, and it will happen to them one way or the other. But if you take part in it according to my direction, then you will have a glorious life, a glorious death, a glorious existence. You'll have a nice kingdom. Your brothers will be situated well. And not only that, but all the people on the planet will benefit. from the good rulership of you and your brothers. So therefore, do it. Just do it. So then the mood of this universal form shifts. After Krishna's instructions to Arjuna, which take place in verses 32 to 34, then Arjuna starts to pray, and his prayers go through a metamorphosis. They start from a place of awe and fear and overwhelming wonder, and they go back to his loving relationship, his friendship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they begin with glorification, because Arjuna is seeing that ultimately everything is coming from Krishna, everything is controlled by Krishna, everything is due to Krishna's will. So glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is beyond anyone's understanding. He's completely amazing, beyond words. So out of fear and out of awe and out of reverence, Arjuna offers his first two prayers. And then he goes on and he apologizes. He says, perhaps I've been too friendly to you. Perhaps I made a mistake thinking that you and I were just, ordinary friends. We laughed together, we ate together, we slept together, etc., etc. And I may have offended you. I may have called you in ways that were presumptuous of me. So if I committed any kind of offense, please tolerate me. And he gives some very interesting analogies there. He says, tolerate me like a father tolerates his son, or a husband tolerates his wife jokingly, or the jokes of his wife, or the familiarity, or a mother tolerates her child. So these relationships are loving relationships. They're intimate relationships. And because of the intimacy of the relationship, the tolerance is great. A mother will tolerate a child to the point where she'll die for the child. So the this relationship, this understanding, this apology is coming to the point where Arjuna is starting to see again his loving relationship with Krishna. And so then he moves from apologizes and he makes some requests. And he says, more than being sorry, I'm just too overwhelmed by this form. And really, I just want to see the form of yours that I love and that I've always loved. So please remove this universal form and come back to your Somyavapu, that beautiful form that I have a loving relationship with. And so that's what happens. And Arjuna is appeased by Krishna's beautiful form. And as soon as Arjuna sees Krishna's form, he's immediately appeased, he's immediately peaceful, he's immediately feels protected. And Krishna explains to him, you can't see this form by penance or austerity or sacrifice or Vedic study. The only reason I'm showing you this form, this two-arm form, is because you're my devotee, because you're an Ananya Bhakta, because you're completely surrendered unto me. And that's the requirement for seeing this form. And that's the requirement for having that kind of peaceful assurance that everything is going to be okay. Until we come to that position of thinking that Krishna has got the whole world in his hand, he's in charge of everything, he's got it covered, we will have anxiety. Even though we hear differently, we'll have anxiety. So then Krishna speaks, there's a couple of verses that summarize this chapter. And he says, he who works for me, considering me the supreme, who is devoted to me without material attachments, without enmity toward me or any living being, will surely attain me, O Arjuna. And so he encourages Arjuna to go on and fight. And basically that's what happens. There's a couple of more chapters that teach us the process of devotional service. But the stage is set now for Arjuna's ignorance to be dispelled, and his ability to participate in the battle without too much disturbance. I won't say any disturbance, because even on the battlefield, after the Bhagavad Gita conversation, Arjuna sometimes goes through some changes. And such is the nature of us, that even though we make a decision to surrender to Krishna, even though we recognize that God is God, that he's the supreme person, that we can have a loving relationship with him, still we forget. And it's very difficult for us to maintain that remembrance in times of difficulty. And certainly this was a time of difficulty for Arjuna. So now we have 11 minutes. It's an auspicious number for conversation, questions, and I leave it to you, and I will remain silent until you require me to speak. All I see, I don't know anybody here, and I see that there's 16 people here. I can't see even one person alive. So, Hare Krishna.
I think what Mataji wants to say is, like, if you can turn on your cameras, that'd be wonderful. If you are in a position to turn on your camera.
Thank you, Ajita.
All right, so any questions?
Oh, there's a person. Vibhuti, what an appropriate name for the
11th chapter.
discussion. Yeah. Well, it's actually the 10th chapter, but it's discussed in the 11th chapter. Anybody have any questions, comments, realizations, reflections?
Vibhuti Mati, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, you have to unmute yourself if you want to speak. And you can also go down to the bottom of your screen. You see there's reactions. You can raise your hand. Oh, look,
Hare
all of a
Krishna.
sudden, everybody came to life. Hare Krishna. All glories to Prabhupada.
Just a small question. Just now in the today's class discussion, you told that Arjuna was not able to see Krishna's um, uh, the beauty and the bigger picture of Krishna with his eyes. So he was given some power by Krishna to see his thing. So, but how can Sanjay see that and explain that to Dhritarashtra?
He didn't
without
see
that
it.
power?
Well, Sanjaya saw it after Arjuna saw it. At the beginning, he got a preview from Krishna. Krishna first explained what was going to be seen, and then Sanjaya explained what Krishna explained, what was going to be seen, and then the vision started, and then Sanjaya started describing it. Also, there's another reason, and Sanjaya did have vision before Arjuna, because Sanjaya was blessed with vision by his spiritual master, which is Vedavyas. And he was given transcendental vision, or the ability to see whatever happened on the battlefield. So it was a limited transcendental vision, but he was given that empowerment by Vyasadeva so that he could serve his the person he was a servant of Dhritarashtra, so he could do his service well, because Dhritarashtra wouldn't be able to see anything. So Sanjaya was empowered so that he could see what was happening on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And whatever he chose to focus on, he would be able to see it. So he heard, I beg your pardon?
It was live streaming 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, it was live streaming. Actually, Prabhupada compared it to a TV. He was like transcendental television. So he was live streaming what was on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Anybody else?
I hope, Vibhuti Mati, that was...
That's okay?
You have any follow-ups you can ask? Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Everybody's been hearing from you, so why should they want to hear from me?
Ah, please. What you say?
May I, Prabhuji?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to ask Mataji. Just share your experience with Srila Prabhupada. Like you were
that's the default question. We don't have enough time for me to share my experience with Srila Prabhupada.
Any best experience, yeah, one best moment with him, like you can share.
Well, It's actually, Srila Prabhupada was kind of in some way very similar to the universal form in the sense that he could be very, very beautiful, very soft, very accommodating, very able to balance all apparent incongruities. And at the same time, he could be like a lion. And if he came across somebody, especially preaching impersonal philosophy, which he considered to be trying to kill Krishna, he often used that expression that they want to kill Krishna. They want to take Krishna's body away from him and turn him into nothing. He would get very, very angry, and he could, or if, it's one thing I didn't mention is that even grandfather Bhishma, part of the reason he died on the Battle of Kurukshetra, or at least started to die on the Battle of Kurukshetra, was because he was part of a problem. He was there in the assembly when Draupadi was insulted, and he didn't do anything about it. And so he had to suffer a little bit for that. And part of the suffering was that he, although he could never be killed by anybody, he had to be killed by Arjuna on the Battle of Kurukshetra. So he suffered that humiliation, he may not have seen it as a humiliation, but in the eyes of the society, Arjuna was able to kill the unkillable. So Arjuna got the glory for that, although neither of them saw it that way. And he was forced to suffer that consequence for acting that way. So Prabhupada also, he didn't sit idly. There was one experience that comes to mind. There was a program, I believe it was we were in Hyderabad, South India somewhere, and there was a stage presentation, and the devotees, Prabhupada asked the devotees to dance. So everybody was on the stage to kirtan, and the women were dancing in the front, and people started to grab at their feet and at their saris from off the stage, some young boys. We sometimes see that even now in India, where these young whippersnapper boys, even we saw with Samba, right, when he went to the sages and said, tell me why this girl is pregnant, and what she didn't work out too well for him either. So Prabhupada took the kartals. He took a pair of kartals and he started swinging them like a weapon. And he started swinging them in the front of the stage so that these boys had to move their hands. And then he had the men take the women off the stage. So Prabhupada could be like a warrior when he had to be. And there were many, many times when Prabhupada, not only at his disciples, but at other people, he would show that on certain subjects, he could be very, very strong. So, but at other times he was soft like a rose, and he was so tolerant and so willing to forget. And Harisari often speaks about how Harisari, myself, and Shrutakirti Prabhus were on the stage in Odessa in Russia or Ukraine, and we had a competition who could get yelled at more by Prabhupada. And Harisari brought up the point that even if Prabhupada really chastised you, or worse still, is when Prabhupada wouldn't talk to you, when you just knew he was angry and he didn't say anything. And that was that was worse than being yelled at. And then, but if you came back an hour later into his room to bring him his lunch or something, Prabhupada had forgotten about it completely, and he never mentioned it again. He would just, it was over, it was done, the message was delivered, and now it was time to move on. So Prabhupada had that ability also to forgive and forget. And we only have 2 minutes left.
Okay, any other questions from the topic? Thank you, Vishal Prabhu, for asking that. It was very sweet.
Yeah.
Hearing what Prabhupada.
I tried to make it relevant to the topic.
To the topic, yes, that's your expertise. All right, I think that's
okay.
If there's no more questions, we are very grateful to Mother Laxmimoni for joining early.
Thank you for having me. It's funny when you asked me it didn't click in my head immediately that it was the universal form. And then when I realized that it was the universal form you were asking me to give a summary of, I thought, you did that just because you didn't want to give universal form. You didn't want to talk on the universal form, so you asked me to do
You
it.
can blame Vibhuti Mataji. She was the one last week. She said, can you please have somebody come and summarize this 11th chapter for us? I said, I think I know the perfect person, and that's you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It was great. Actually, I realized when I was preparing for the class that there's nothing like preparing for a class to study the scripture. If you want to study the scripture, you've got to speak it, because when you study to speak to others, you really understand a lot more than when you just read for yourself.
Exactly. That's the only way. I actually started this whole program in the US, like I think 10 years ago over Skype, because I was told to read the Bhagavad Gita. And I was like, I can't do that unless there is some compelling reason. And that was, I have to speak and people are waiting and there's a time. So I have to prepare for it. That's the only way I would read. So I hacked my brain to.
Yeah, it really changes everything. And I've taught Bhagavad Gita so many times, but just coming back and looking at with new eyes and a new audience really brought it alive. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Very much, Matt. You have a wonderful day and good night to all of you. Thank you for
good night to all of
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
All glories to
Krishna.
Prabhupada. Hare
Prabhupada
Bol.
ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki